Hello， 大家好，欢迎回到外媒看中国，我是安博人。The US government has passed a US $1.6 billion bill that aims to spread anti-China propaganda internationally, earmarking $325 million a year, or around $1 million a day, until the year 2027 to quote-unquote counter the malign influence of China around the world. That will mean that media outlets across the globe will be further incentivized to create and publish anti-China misinformation and lies aimed at slowing the country's peaceful development. So then it's more important than ever to have voices from China speaking directly to people around the world. Just one of those voices is that of Victor Gao, who is regularly seen debating on behalf of his country to Western audiences. He's a regular guest on the BBC's Hard Talk, CNN, DW News, ABC, and he recently went head-to-head on Al Jazeera English with Mehdi Hassan. I'll be asking him about that. Today he's here with me. This is Reports on China. I'm Andy Borham in Shanghai. Let's get reporting. Somehow it's a crime when Russia does it to us, but good information ops when we want to discredit Beijing's Belt and Road initiatives worldwide. Those are the words of geopolitical analyst Marcus Stanley after the US House of Representatives passed a bill that will throw US $1.6 billion directly at media outlets around the world who are willing to produce and broadcast anti-China propaganda, which is ultimately aimed at ensuring the world continues to see China as a threat, a negative, evil force that is somehow poised to ruin the world. Why do they need to keep spending so much? Well, because that is exactly the opposite of the truth. China is a unique example of how to turn a country around from poverty to prosperity without firing a single bullet. And that terrifies the people in Washington. So now it's more important than ever to have real Chinese voices speaking directly to international audiences around the world. Today, I'm honored to welcome to the show one of those voices. At just 16 years of age, he started university. At 21, he graduated with a master's degree and became the translator of the man widely credited with guiding China through its miraculous reform and opening up, Deng Xiaoping, at the time the youngest top translator in China. Today, he's a professor at Suzhou University, vice president for the Center for China and Globalization, and a regular guest on numerous Western media outlets. Mr. Victor Gao, welcome to Reports on China.
Thank you very much for having me.
Firstly, I want to ask you about the proposed $1.6 billion that Washington is earmarking to, quote-unquote, counter the malign influence of China around the globe. Why is it so important for Washington to constantly smear China?
First of all, this recent decision is a wrong decision. It's not reflecting the decency of the American people. It's kind of a smear campaign. It's distortion of the facts, and it denies the realities on the ground in China. And I think this money spent will be completely wasted because China is a megatrend in the world. All of us need to accept China as a megatrend. And no matter how much money you spend on smearing China, misrepresenting China, doesn't change the fact that China remains a megatrend. You need to live with this megatrend rather than trying to overturn this megatrend.
So what can China do to counter what will clearly be a marked increase in misinformation in the media landscape, which is already flooded with anti-China propaganda?
Well, first of all, China needs to stand on matters of principle and continue to do what is the right thing for China to do, and represent its best substance to the world. Secondly, I think China needs to refute such fabrications and falsehoods whenever it is discovered and try its best to communicate directly with the people and countries in the world about the realities and the megatrend in the world, rather than allow these countries to become victim of such smear campaign launched by the US government against China.
Speaking of speaking to audiences around the world, you're a regular guest on many Western media shows, including multiple stints on BBC's Hard Talk. Let's take a quick look.
democracy, because what we see on this 100th anniversary is that the Chinese Communist Party has found ways, ideological contortions, to enable the people of China to get rich, to make money, to enjoy many of the fruits of a capitalist system. What they have not allowed the Chinese people at all is any degree of political freedom, any real ability to freely express themselves, to express dissent against the ruling party. Are you telling me that that total disconnect between economic freedom and political, intellectual freedom is sustainable for the long term?
First of all, Stephen, allow me to disagree with your analysis. First of all, I think the system in China works for China today under the Chinese circumstances. Secondly,
but Mr. Gao, it only works if you're prepared to see all of those who dissent locked up, repressed, surveilled, robbed of what we in the West call basic human rights.
Allow me to disagree with you again. Why? Because I would say any society everywhere in the world today has some taboo list. It may differ from one country to another, but don't tell me that there is any country that you have freedom of speech in absolute term rather than conditional term, where you have freedom of expression without any conditions to it. No, I would say freedom or human rights all exist, not in the vacuum, but relative to rights and obligations. In China, we have our own freedom, we have our own democracy. It's conditioned to circumstances in China. And in China, there is a short list of red button issues you are not allowed to talk about. For example, Tibet independence, Xinjiang independence, or Hong Kong independence. For example, if anyone wants to declare Hong Kong as a republic of Hong Kong, it will be wiped out immediately. It's not part of the freedom or democracy as we understand in China. But you cannot say that the rest of the system in China is not freedom or human rights. I would make one point. Without empowering the people, you cannot change China from a very backward country to the second largest economy in the world today. And also, don't forget, the Chinese economy is larger than that of the United States today if you use purchasing power parity. So we are talking about revolutionary changes.
All right, but the thing is,
don't deny that China has its inner qualities and strengths that maybe some Western countries fail to fully understand.
So in the face of some really obviously false narratives and laughable accusations against China, like, for example, that China has some kind of widespread social credit system, something that's been debunked many times, I'm wondering, Mr. Gao, how you keep your professionalism and composure.
Well, I'm very often shocked by these false accusations against China, orchestrated by some Western governments. And these are very dangerous developments because, first of all, they are wrong, they are false. Secondly, they aim to distort the realities. They wanted to create a false narrative about China. And while China has always been a major force standing firmly for peace and stability and development, they want to misrepresent China as a force for hostilities, for confrontation, for example, or for picking up a fight with its neighboring countries. Therefore, I think we need to seize every moment, whenever it is possible, to stand up and speak about the realities about China. I do not mean that we need to misrepresent China in any way, on the left or on the right. We just need to give the real perspective to the global audience about the realities in China. And no one can really hide from the fact that China has achieved huge amount of rapid, profound transformation over the past 46 years. And China by today is the second largest economy if we use official exchange rate, and is the largest economy if we use PPP as the measurement. So nobody can really completely misrepresent what China is, and their attempts to mischaracterize China and distort the realities about China will eventually come back to bite them rather than really hurt China's fundamental interest.
The BBC was blocked from Chinese airwaves in 2021 after the British government blocked China's English language channel CGTN. Now, you said recently that you hope BBC can come back to Chinese screens one day. So I was wondering, do you truly believe that that channel offers any value to Chinese people in 2024?
Well, BBC itself has multiple channels. Some of the channels are non-political, for example, geography, nature, etc., which are very high quality. I myself have been regularly interviewed by BBC through multiple different programs, for example, BBC World Service or many other programs. And I like being interviewed by BBC. We, of course, do not have identical views on many important issues, but at least in the interviews done of me by BBC, there is at least an attempted professionalism demonstrated in doing the interviews, you name it, etc. And I think it is very unfortunate that China was forced to ban BBC as a direct result of British government banning CGTN in Britain. I personally hope both CGTN and the BBC can be restored back to normal operations. While we may not agree with everything made by BBC, I think for the Chinese people to have the benefit of listening to another perspective, sometimes highly critical, sometimes very hostile, sometimes misinformation, etc., at least we can get the benefit and we can listen to different voices and eventually come to the right conclusion based on our overall assessment of the situation. I hope both China and Britain will do their utmost to make sure that these media operations will be normalized and will be allowed to operate in each other's country.
Now I just want to play another clip of you on a British show that went viral recently, of you laying down the reality about Britain, a former superpower. Let's watch.
There's a big debate in Britain about what language we use about China. Are you a competitor? Are you an ally? Are you a threat? How would you regard your relationship with Britain?
First of all, between China and Britain, from the Chinese perspective, Britain is not a rival, is not a competitor, it is not an enemy, is not an adversary. Britain is just an important country to get along with in peace and in friendship and for mutual benefit. Now, how Britain looks at China, it's up to the British government and people to decide. But I think it will be completely misguided for Britain to view China as an enemy or adversary or a competitor. What do China and Britain compete with? China is the largest manufacturer of automobiles. Competing with Britain? No. China is the largest exporter of EV cars and will lead the whole world in EV production. Is Britain a competitor? No. China will be the biggest and most important producer and R&D in terms of semiconductor in no time. Does that mean that China competes with Britain? No. China will be the leading nation in AI revolution. Is Britain a competitor? No. So I think British government should not overestimate its impact on the global scene and view Britain as a rival of China. China is not. China is a fact. China is a megatrend for Britain to live with and get along with. Let's make peace rather than agitating for war.
Okay, I think that one thing people really loved about that clip was how you really laid down the cold, hard truth. One of the things that some people say about Chinese media is that it's altogether too nice and fluffy, and that we, or Chinese rather, should perhaps throw more punches. What's your opinion on that? Do you think it's time that China gave some more tough love?
Well, I would say for that clipping you just now used, what I said in the interview is from the bottom of my heart. I spoke my own conscience, and I spoke about the realities. There are countries in the world which consider China as a rival or a competitor. The reality, as I tried to explain in that interview, is completely the opposite, because China is really not a rival, not a competitor, not an enemy, not their opponent in multiple ways. China is just a reality in the world. China is a very large, very impactful, very influential country, and you need to get along with that reality rather than consider China in a wrongful way as your rival. China does not rival with you because China is way ahead of you and way above you in multiple ways of measurements. And try to imagine that you are a rival of China is completely detached from the realities in the world. I think we need to communicate about the realities about China to the global audience in the language that they can understand, and also in a very transparent and straightforward way, rather than, for example, always being on the defensive as if we are on the wrong side of history. The reality is that China, especially China over the past 46 years, is on the right side of history and represents the future of the world and the brighter future and the promises of the world in the coming years and decades.
Now, recently you went head-to-head with Mehdi Hasan on Al Jazeera English in London in a debate which many believe Mehdi won hands down. Now, he has a book which is called Win Every Argument. In it, he describes the massive levels he goes to prepare for a debate like the one he had with you, including role-playing with his staff for days on end in order to come up with comebacks for every single argument that their guests may come up with. I would say without a doubt that he probably did the same in preparation for your appearance. So I was wondering how you feel about that debate and what you did in preparation.
First of all, I was invited to attend that episode. Originally, it was described as an interview. Then it became a debate. And then you saw what happened in London. I would say, as far as that episode is concerned, Mehdi Hasan was not doing an interview because he never allowed me to finish my arguments to start with. Then it is not a real debate because debate has rules and format. It needs to be balanced, is that right? And Mehdi really does not engage me in a balanced way about a debate. Now, to the best of my understanding, it became a kind of lynching. But if Mehdi Hasan wants to lynch somebody, I was the wrong person to be lynched. Now, I would say Mehdi Hasan, for that episode, really did not emerge as a reporter. At best, he became a warrior, a wolf reporter. And he completely lacked balance and eagerness to understand why the interviewee or the debater had a point to make. He refused to listen. And he demonstrated a high level of prejudice and bigotry and bias, a refusal to understand the realities. And also, I think he lacked basic knowledge about the important matters we talked about. I would say by the end of the day, he didn't achieve anything because, as I mentioned, the mega trend that there is only one China in the world and Taiwan and Tibet and Xinjiang are parts of China never were changed. And I think Mehdi Hasan needs to accept the realities that he is a reporter and he needs to have the decency and the balance and the impartiality in engaging people in doing his journalism rather than becoming a bigot, try to push for a special agenda which is against the realities in the world of today.
Yeah, speaking of balance in journalism, I did find it quite dodgy that Mehdi pretended to call on random audience members for questions, and then it just so happened that he called on a Xinjiang separatist, a Tibetan separatist, and a Hong Kong separatist. Do you think that was fair?
First of all, I think all this is pre-orchestrated with a particular agenda. You mentioned some of these people who rose up to ask questions. I was particularly shocked that Uyghur lady, whom Mehdi described as a unbiased person, for example, actually holds a U.S. passport. She is a U.S. citizen. In that sense, she completely has no standing at all in intervening or interfering in the domestic affairs in China or pretend to represent a legitimate voice about the Uyghur people. Now, Mehdi even said that he knew some Uyghur people in Washington, D.C., whom he got along very well, fine. However, if any Uyghur people in the United States want to push for a caliphate agenda, or even want to turn Virginia into a caliphate state, for example, they will meet with the brutal force of the federal government, the fierce opposition of the American people, because people in the United States will never allow them to do that. So why should Mehdi or anyone else in the world expect that if anyone, Uyghur or otherwise in China, who wants to turn Xinjiang into a caliphate and who want to launch jihad against anyone else, for example, why should anyone in China allow that to happen? No, we will never allow that to happen, and we will never allow Xinjiang to be split away from China. As, for example, decent Americans will never allow any Uyghur or anyone else to turn, let's say, Virginia into a caliphate and to allow anyone to pursue an agenda of extremism, terrorism, or separatism in the United States or anywhere else.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I know you're very busy, Mr. Gao, so I have one more question for you today. What do you think the West least understands about China in 2024?
I think the West need to understand the realities in China. China is a force for peace, stability, development, technological breakthroughs, etc. It is completely different from what Western countries want to present China to the global audience. China is not agitating for war. China is not agitating for exploitation of any other country. China treats all the other countries on an equal basis, and China respects each other country's political system, social system, values, etc., while China keeps its own tradition, values, and political system. China's view is that we can get along with each other despite of our differences, rather than, for example, having one country dictating to all the other countries. And the Western countries need to understand these basic truths about China for their own benefit and for the benefit of mankind as a whole.
Mr. Victor Gao, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And on that note, that will be it for today, you guys. But as always, I'd love to hear what you think. What should China do to counter US propaganda in the media? Should Chinese voices like Mr. Gao change their tactics? And why is the US so scared of people around the world seeing the real China? Let me know down below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.